The wax had only just begun to melt, sending a slow drip down the brass base of the candle holder. Its golden light pooled upon the oaken table where parchment, uneven at the edges and dusted faintly with age, rested beneath the steady hands of the scribe. Outside, snow whispered against the shutters, a hush that seemed to ask the world to listen closer, to hold still. Inside the study, the walls were lined with wooden shelves, warped slightly with time, each cradling rolls of vellum and leather-bound texts that smelled of pressed herbs and dry ink. The scribe, an older man with pale brows and careful eyes, dipped his quill in a tiny pot of dark brown ink. He worked slowly, with the kind of reverence that made every letter seem like a prayer. Around him, silence held like breath in a chapel, broken only by the gentle rasp of the feathered quill or the occasional pop from the fire tucked low in the hearth. On the corner of the desk, a small bowl of lavender water sat untouched, releasing a faint, soothing scent. Time inside this room did not belong to the world beyond its stone threshold. It moved differently, more gently, more purposefully. The flicker of flame danced softly over vellum as the scribe continued his work, copying a psalm that would be placed in the hands of a monk many villages away. There was no rush, no burden, only the weight of care. Each word written became part of a long, silent conversation with the sacred. And as he paused to stretch his fingers, resting the quill upon its carved stand, a small wind outside rattled the shutter, reminding him of the night beyond, and of the comfort that dwelled within ink, light, and quiet duty. A single thread of candle smoke rose in the still air, curling like a silent hymn toward the vaulted stone ceiling. The scribe's chamber, tucked in the eastern wing of the abbey, had not known interruption since the tolling of the sixth bell. The room held its warmth from the slow-burning fire in the hearth, where orange coals blinked sleepily, and the thick woven rug beneath the desk muffled the chill that crept up from the stone floor. A heavy silence embraced the space, not hollow, but full of thought, devotion, and unspoken memory. The scribe, a woman weathered by seasons of ink and reverence, sat bent over a sheet of calfskin vellum. Her robe, simple and brown, was pulled tight at the sleeves, and her hair was braided with soft strips of linen to keep it from falling into the ink. Her fingers were stained at the tips, trembling slightly with age, though her lines were precise and unfaltering. She was transcribing a genealogy of saints, each name laid upon the page like petals placed on a grave. Outside, a wind sighed through the monastery arches, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and snow. Within, the flame cast a soft halo across her cheek, illuminating the silver thread at her temple and the small crucifix carved into the spine of the manuscript before her. Each letter she inscribed held centuries of faith, each pause a breath of history. She paused to warm her hands on a cup of honeyed water beside her, watching the candlelight flicker inside the surface. In that moment, the past and present merged into one quiet pulse, gentle and enduring. As she returned to the page, the stillness around her deepened, as if the very walls leaned in to watch. And somewhere beyond the window, the abbey bell rang once, soft, steady, a call to prayer, or perhaps simply to continue. The chamber was neither grand nor humble, but something suspended between. A scribe's study nestled high within a cold turret above the cathedral library, where drafts of parchment fluttered like moths on a desk worn smooth by decades of devotion. Outside, snow fell thickly in slow spirals, painting the old rooftops in white silence. Inside, the only sound was the careful rasp of a blade smoothing a new sheet of vellum, and the soft breath of the man who worked by candlelight, hood drawn, face partially hidden. He was young, but his eyes were old. He wrote not for glory nor coin, but for atonement, a vow made in secret after a battle long past, when fire took more than he could carry. The inkpot before him was made of horn, stained and chipped. A ribbon of dark ink traced its rim like dried blood. He dipped the quill slowly, every motion deliberate. He knew each line he transcribed had passed through centuries of hands, monks, mothers, lost children, kings, and he treated each one with quiet awe. The room smelled of beeswax, old leather, and faint rosemary, tucked in the corners to ward off damp. Shelves lined the curved walls, bearing scrolls sealed with wax and dust. Above the fireplace, a faded tapestry of St. Jerome watched with tired eyes. There was peace here, not the kind found in ease, but the kind that follows sorrow, the deep, bone-level quiet of one who has known chaos and chosen silence. As he drew the final line of the day's passage, the candle sputtered low, and the shadows grew long. He pressed his hand briefly to the manuscript, not as signature but as prayer. The snow tapped against the window, and somewhere below a cloister bell rang out the hour. Without a word he stood, closed the book, and let the silence lead him to rest. A heavy fog blanketed the monastery grounds that morning, wrapping the stone walls and narrow corridors in breathless white. In the scriptorium, where light filtered in through a narrow stained glass window, a single candle burned beside a slate of open parchment. The silence here was holy, deeper than speech, broken only by the occasional turning of a page or the creak of a wooden stool. The scribe, an apprentice no more than 17, sat hunched in concentration. His fingers, smudged with charcoal and ink, held the quill with both reverence and fear. It was his first full page alone, and the Latin words shimmered like spells beneath his gaze. A mentor watched from the shadows, saying nothing, trusting in the silence to guide more than correction ever could. Around them, the air smelled of ash, dried rose petals, and the faint mineral tang of wet stone. Scrolls rested in wooden nooks, some crumbling with age, others bearing gilded vines and prayers in red and gold. The candlelight cast halos on the vellum, and the apprentice's breath slowed with each curve of his pen. The page he copied told of a journey through a distant forest, but the real journey was here, in the heartbeat between each line, the discipline of stillness, the awakening of purpose. Outside, a soft rain had begun to fall, its rhythm steady and kind. The scribe paused, then began again, drawing a capital letter shaped like the head of a dragon. He smiled slightly, almost imperceptibly, as the image came alive. The candle flickered, but did not go out. The master nodded once, unseen, and the day unfolded like a quiet hymn between them, ink and rain in harmony. Morning broke slowly through the mullioned windows, painting long amber slants across the stone floor. The study was quiet but not asleep. Dust hung in the beams of light like golden ash suspended in the breath of time. At the center sat a scribe draped in dark wool, bent over a bound book with careful hands. His fingers were wrapped in linen where the cold had cracked them, but he did not flinch. His every motion was steady, as though he were listening to a rhythm deeper than his own. Beside him, a tiny fire hissed within a low hearth, burning herbs with a scent of thyme and oak moss. A pot of melted wax warmed nearby, used to seal pages completed before nightfall. On the walls, faded diagrams of the constellations hung beside passages of scripture, copied long ago by scribes now buried in the chapel crypt. The man had written here for over 20 years. His eyes had softened, his shoulders bent, but his devotion had only deepened. He was copying a text about the birth of spring, how lambs came too early once, and the fields flooded with light before the stars were ready. Yet, as he wrote, his face bore winter. Memories of a lost brother, fallen to illness in the same monastery, stirred beneath the parchment. Still, he wrote, The act was no longer task, but offering. Each letter was both salve and sorrow. A bell rang somewhere far off. The man paused, resting his hand upon the page. The candlelight shimmered across the ink, still wet, catching the trembling weight of each line. He closed his eyes, not in sleep, but in communion. Then, with silence as his guide, he dipped the quill again. The light of dusk had begun to settle through the high, narrow windows, blue and soft like a sigh held just before sleep. In the corner of the abbey's library, shielded by thick stone walls and layered rugs, the scribe's chamber flickered with the hush of firelight. Every object inside seemed chosen for its quietness: a worn writing bench, a woolen shawl draped over the chair, a wooden box filled with feathers yet to be cut. The woman who wrote there moved slowly, as though each gesture had its own sacredness. She dipped her quill and wrote in fine Italian script, copying recipes for tinctures and balms. Her hands had known many labors: garden, sickbed, prayer, but here they found gentleness. On her table sat a bowl of dried lavender and a glass jar of ink mixed with violet root, the scent delicate and earthy. Behind her, wind brushed the shuttered windows, causing the candle flame to dance across the vellum like spirit. Her mind wandered to the herbs she'd picked that morning: nettles and sage, and the way the frost had clung to their stems. She wrote a note in the margin, a memory, perhaps, or a correction to the old recipe. It wasn't for anyone else. It was a kindness for the future. As she straightened her spine, a single raven cried outside, distant but vivid. She looked up, eyes catching the last light on the curved dome of the ceiling. In the silence that followed, the past and present folded inward like parchment turned upon itself. She exhaled slowly, deeply, and returned to the page, her pen steady once more. In the farthest wing of the monastery, beneath the ancient bell tower, lay a study half forgotten by time. Dust muffled the room, and lichen crawled faintly up the stone frames of the arched windows. But inside, the desk remained untouched by decay. Upon it rested a thick manuscript, pages open, ink still moist, proof of a presence both recent and eternal. The monk who kept this space was rarely seen. They said he had once been a soldier, that his silence had not always been peace. But now, cloaked in undyed wool, he sat each evening before dusk, copying the Gospels in a hand that looked carved rather than written. His desk was lit by 2 candles shaped like towers, their wax melting into rivers down their iron holders. He did not rush. His fingers moved with the weight of prayer. Outside, the bell tolled once, its deep voice echoing through cloister and courtyard alike. But inside, time stood still. The scribe's breath was slow, his face a map of quiet repentance. The ink he used was mixed with soot and wine, thick, dark, permanent. Each letter felt like absolution. On the windowsill lay a feather, white, unmarked, left perhaps by the dove that visited each morning. The monk's gaze lingered on it as he paused, hand hovering above the script. The candlelight warmed the air, filled it with gold, and for a moment he closed his eyes, not to rest, but to listen, to the silence, to what it asked of him. Then he opened them again, dipped the quill, and wrote the next word as though it might redeem the one before.